Welcome to the Albany Book Festival online, presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. You can learn more about the festival and find direct links to independent booksellers at our festival webpage, albanybookfestival.com. Follow us on social media and hear from more videos from the Writers Institute.
Very excited today about our guest, Courtney Sullivan. Before we begin the conversation, I'll just say I'm Paul Grandal, the director of the New York State Writers Institute, and we're thankful for your support. You can watch all these conversations with authors archived on our New York State Writers Institute YouTube channel. You can see them online also at nyswritersinstitute.org, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So Courtney, really interested in your new novel, getting a lot of buzz, Friends and Strangers. I saw Jenna Bush, gave it an endorsement. I saw you on her show. You've been doing some wonderful virtual events. But what really interested to our readers and people in this community, it's set in our area. So talk about, I know you went to Smith College, and I know the backstory of your babysitting experience at Smith's College and the woman that you babysat, which we'll get into, but talk about why was part of it set here? Do you have a connection to our area?
So it's funny because when I wrote the book, I had no connection to the area. And I have to say that's very rare for me. When I write about place, I really like to only write about places I know well. But I guess in the interest of time, to be honest, when I was writing this book, I was living in Brooklyn, New York. I had attended Smith College, as you said, in Western Mass, and I was imagining Smith as the setting for this story. Sam, one of the two main characters, goes to a women's college, a liberal arts school, and I was really imagining Smith. And there are other colleges in this sort of consortium that are referred to nearby. One is like a very sort of hippie, liberal, small school, and very much I had in my mind's eye Hampshire College. And then there's another school, a big state school that someone says, she thought it was a city the first time she ever saw it, and that was very much based on UMass Amherst.
Because I thought that was us. I thought that was University at Albany when I'm reading it.
I know. It's so funny. And, once I'd really gotten deep into writing the story, and I realized that a part of it was going to be sort of critical of certain aspects of the higher education system, I didn't want it to feel as though that was specific to Smith and that I was criticizing Smith. And so I decided to make these schools all either nameless, or I think the women's college is nameless, or give them a fictional name so that I could sort of distance them from Smith. And in a way, I'm very happy to hear that you thought that, because a lot of people who've read it who know Smith, they're like, oh, this is obviously Smith. But I still thought I need to do my due diligence and at least put it somewhere else. So
because it reminded us, because we have several colleges. You have 3 colleges in a row, and there's a pond, and I'm like, oh, this kind of fits. I mean, I think she sort of certainly fictionalized it, but it really felt like Albany.
yes.
But you wrote this great New York Times piece that I want to talk about too, about babysitting and the Babysitters Club. But the byline is Loudonville, New York, which is a suburb of Albany. So what were you doing in Loudonville?
So what happened was, a lot of times my novels end up being published and having some kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in my real life. I often have told my editor that I'd like to write a book about lottery winners for that reason, but she never takes me up on it. But so in this book, I have this woman with her husband and her baby, and they move to this area that I never specifically say where it is, but if you kind of were to map it out based on what she says, I think it would be, sort of the Albany area. And so strangely enough, in mid-March, when COVID, sort of came blaring into the city, my uncle had a friend, he said, who, she's just moved out of her home. She was going to sell it, but now she's decided to wait. It's totally furnished. Why don't you and your husband and the kids go and stay there, for a little while? So we said, okay, we thought we'd go for like 2 weeks, and we ended up in Loudonville in this beautiful neighborhood. I mean, we loved it. And I have to say, I lived in Brooklyn for almost 20 years, and I never spent any time in that area, to my shame. And once we were there, we fell in love. We loved it. It's so beautiful.
It's really nice.
So many places, we would take the kids all the time we'd go to Saratoga, we'd go to all the beautiful state parks, and even to Northampton, to Massachusetts, and to Lenox, and it was so amazing. And we ended up being there for, I think, 4 months. And in the process of being there, we thought we were there for maybe a couple weeks, and we just ended up deciding to move. We decided, we'd always kind of thought we were going to, eventually move to the suburbs because we have 2 kids and a big dog. And we thought, well, let's see, this is such a weird year. It's going to be such a weird year. We might as well try living somewhere else. And unfortunately for us, fortunately for the owner of the Loudonville house, she got a new buyer for her house without ever even putting it on the market. So we had to skedaddle out of there. So when that piece ran in the New York Times with the Loudonville, dateline, we were actually 2 days away from moving again. And we are now living in the Boston area where I am from. And we don't know where the heck we're going to settle. But for now, we're here.
That's a lot to pack up, because you dedicate your novel Friends and Strangers to your 2 children, Leo and Stella. Yeah. And I love in your acknowledgments, you explain, you were racing a deadline, you were pregnant, but so what ages are they now? And how do you, this moving can't be easy with 2 very young kids and everything. And
it's crazy. So Leo turned 3 in June, and Stella is 21 months old. So wow. They're 16 months apart.
Yeah.
And that always seemed a little crazy, but definitely in pandemic times, it's especially crazy.
Right. And the character, the 2 main characters, Sam and Isabella, the dictum right what you know, Isabella seems somewhat like your life, somewhat autobiographical. She's a writer, and now being a new mother, she doesn't have time to write, so she finds these ways when she can. She's always exhausted. You talk very frankly about mothering things, breastfeeding, and other issues. How much do you bring your real life into your novels?
Well, I think, my earliest books, Commencement was my first novel, which was set at Smith College and about a group of recent graduates from Smith, and I actually named Smith in that book. And my second book, Maine, they were really close to my own personal experience. Maine being about a big Irish Catholic family from Boston. And, I think every book has sort of pieces of me and not pieces of me, and every character too. People are often like, when they read this book, they say, oh, are you Elizabeth or are you Sam? One of my good friends read it and said, oh, you're George, which I loved because, it's true. Like you're the author is in all of the characters, right?
Right.
But my books, as I've gone along, have all really incorporated a lot of research. I love doing research. I was a researcher at the New York Times for 4 years while I was writing my first 2 books. And I always dreamed of like leaving that job and just being able to write fiction. But when I finally did that, I missed doing research so much. And so I've always incorporated it into my novels in a big way. And this book was the first one where that didn't really happen. And people have asked me about that since it came out. And I feel like the reason is that when you have your first baby, it's like, you're peering, the best thing about writing fiction is like peering into lives that are not your own. And when you have your first baby, you are kind of peering into a life that's not your own, even though it is your own. Right. So everything feels new and fascinating and, overwhelming and all of that. So I think more than any of my other books, I think the other ones kind of might incorporate real life, but real life as I've already kind of lived and processed it. Whereas this one, I was just kind of writing things down as they were happening. And kind of amazed too, because when you have a baby, you get pulled into this world of other people who have babies or have had babies, and there's so much to learn, and it's all very interesting, I guess, to people with babies. But I myself had never thought about it, right? Exactly in these terms. So, and there's a lot of it that I think we kind of don't talk about, and I wanted to kind of shine a light on that too.
So this book had its genesis in your time at Smith College when you were a babysitter for a woman. Can you explain that scene? And it's also woven into this novel, that intense relationship with particularly a mother, but parents and a babysitter, and then they're kind of gone, and that's sort of what I guess was your agent or your friends that said, like, hey, that should be a book, and it kind of kicked around your head. Can you explain how it all came to fuel your imagination?
Yeah, I think when you're a writer, there are moments in life or something you hear about or whatever it might be that kind of triggers a story. It gives you the idea for a story, and it usually has this sort of shimmer around it that I want to write about that, but it may not always be right at that second that you are meant to write that story. And I think that's something I've learned over time, over the process of doing this now, publishing novels for 11 years, that you might have a great idea, but it might need to kind of percolate, it might need some time. And I look at my last book, Saints for All Occasions, and I think like the germ of the idea for that book about two sisters immigrating from Ireland in the 50s really was sort of, the seed was kind of planted 15 years ago, the first time I went to Ireland and saw the little house that my great grandmother was born in. But I didn't write about it then. 10 years had to pass before I was really ready to write that story.
Right.
In this case, 10 years after I graduated from Smith, I was back at Smith to give a reading, and I left the hall where I was reading, and I went out to the street. I was walking to my car, and I was standing at the crosswalk. It had just started to drizzle rain, and this huge SUV pulled up and stopped at the light, and I looked, and driving the SUV was this woman, Catherine, who I had known my senior year at Smith. I babysat for her newborn baby, and we were really close, and she had just moved from New York. She really kind of encouraged me to go to New York and, be a writer and all of these things. And so to see her being back at Smith after 10 years away, it was like, oh my God. And I was waving and saying, hi. And she had no idea who I was. By this point in time, she'd had 2 more kids, probably many more babysitters. And, she didn't recognize me, and she drove off. And so I was telling another friend this over dinner that night, who's also a novelist. And she's like, ooh, that sounds like a great, opening scene in a novel. And I agreed with her, but I wasn't sure yet. What would I say exactly? What would the story be? And many years later, when I was pregnant with my son, I felt like, oh, I get it. I want to write this now because I will soon have been both these women. And in a way, it's sort of a conversation with my younger self, this idea of being the mother and having been the babysitter too. And I think when you're a babysitter, which I have noticed in the process of promoting this book, a lot of writers were babysitters. Maybe that's just because a lot of women were babysitters, but a lot of women writers were babysitters. And I feel like there are these things about it that are similar, like the ability to go into someone's home, someone's family, and just observe them in their natural habitat. No one really gets to do that. writers want to do that.
Right.
Babysitters actually get to do that. So I think, having been that person, there's also the relationship between the babysitter and particularly the mother in the family, where you're kind of looking at someone really close up and saying, is she the kind of woman I want to be? And so there's these sort of different versions of adulthood that you get to witness when you play that role.
Right. I mean, the two characters, and you use alternating chapters, the babysitter, Sam, the mother, Isabella. But I find a lot of sadness in Isabella, even though, she's a woman of accomplishment. She's got a couple books published. I like the way you describe at parties, like in the book, like, have you been published? That sort of awkward moment when you say you're a writer, and it's like, have you been published? Well, I haven't heard of you. And then there's this weird thing. But also, even around motherhood and the relationship to her husband, who's a professor and kind of not a tenured or well-established. I don't know. Do you see her as kind of a sad and unfulfilled character in a way? That's the way I saw her, that even though she had a lot of privilege and things, she just wasn't all that satisfied with her life in a lot of ways. Even she was a mother. I don't know. What were you trying to draw out of her character? What kind of emotions do you want the reader to have about her life?
Well, I think, first off, what you just described about the worst question you can ever ask a writer, like at a cocktail party or something, would I have heard of you? And then they, well, what are your books? And then you tell them. Yeah. And in my case, I've written 5, so it's long. They're like, well, this is, and they just go, no. Yeah. No. It's like, why did you ask? I don't know. But anyway, Elizabeth, I think that, part of it is a lot of really ambitious women I know who kind of went through their 20s and early 30s, mid 30s, working so hard to achieve whatever the professional goal was. And also the romantic goal and the getting the family together, there's a number of years where you're just trying to kind of build it, right? And then you do. And I think for a lot of women, there's a sense of, well, now what? Or when do you ever really get to feel like you're accomplished, like you have achieved something? Because every time, if you are this certain kind of overachieving woman, every time you reach a new goal, you set a new goal. And that's in some ways great. That's what keeps you going, right? But also, like, where's the moment where you get to just sit back and enjoy it? And I think that's the piece that she is missing. And I think the other thing is that she comes from a really dysfunctional family. I mean, I think that phrase is a little overused when it comes to fiction. There really aren't going to be a lot of novels about functional families because that would be so boring. But she really has like an ache to her because of that. She wants to be married and have this child and do a good job at all of that. But she doesn't feel like she has the roadmap. And I think, she feels really lost in that respect. Right. And there's a sense of, I love the Anne Lamott quote, don't compare your insides to their outsides. Mm-hmm. And I think Elizabeth and Sam both kind of suffer from that in a way. Sam comes into Elizabeth's home and she's like, she just has the most beautiful decor and everything is arranged so beautifully. And she has the best hand soap and the cutest baby, and her life is, it's just so together. Elizabeth doesn't feel that way inside at all. And right. She, I think in many ways kind of envies what Sam has as far as a really stable family structure and also all the opportunity. Like Sam is just sort of possibility. Her life is just possibility. Whereas Elizabeth has now made her choices and reached a point in life where, from Sam's point of view, you get to sort of be settled, and that must be so lovely. From Elizabeth's point of view, it's like, okay,
Right.
now this feels like the hard part.
Right. I like in your acknowledgments, you thank a lot of friends. You seem to have a wide circle of great women friends who are some writers. Can you explain your process? So you send a draft manuscript to this, including Meg Wolitzer and some other, a whole list, I don't know, 10 women. And do you let them pull it apart and things? And what's the process for you when you have a draft?
Yeah, my first novel, my first 3 novels, I think the only people who read them before they were published, or, who really worked on them before they were published, were my agent and my editor. I did have some other people read them, like family members and things, to make sure I wouldn't be disowned. But for the most part, they were the only ones really doing the editing. But the further along I got in my career, when I started out, I didn't know any novelists. It was just something I had always done, was write stories. And it was a very private thing for me. But what's wonderful as a writer is that as you begin to publish and you are sent on book tours and you go to festivals and all of this, then of course you encounter other writers and become kind of a community of writers. So that's really lovely. And what I realized was that a lot of my writer friends, before they showed their work to an agent or an editor, they showed it to other writers. And I really wanted to do that with my book, Saints for All Occasions. I just wanted to see what would happen if I did. And it turned into quite a process. I showed it to 2 friends, Ann Napolitano and Helen Ellis, who are brilliant writers. They are part of a writers group with another writer named Hannah Tinty. And they were so generous, but also pretty tough. They read 400 pages of that book, which I said, oh, this is the first half of the book. And they were like, we can't, no, this cannot be the first half. This is terrible. They basically said they will say it, they didn't say this, but in a kinder way, they basically said, this isn't working. And it wasn't working. And it was a struggle, but I'm so glad that they told me that. And I wanted to do that again with this book. I wanted to have a lot of writers' eyes on the book before it was published. And so, yes, I had Ann Napolitano again read it. Meg Wolitzer read it. Jamie Attenberg read it, and she was the one who had initially thought of the idea for the book. And so quite a few people, and what I loved about that, I think you can certainly have too many readers on a project and too many cooks in the kitchen. But what I loved about it, and the specific writers I asked, who are all friends, they all found a different part of it that specifically they drilled down on and pointed out what could be better about that part. And that was great, and they were all coming to it from very different points of view as different writers and different, people.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
generous. But do you reciprocate to then say, hey, I spent time on your manuscript, and then they send you yours, and are you totally honest? It seems like you all have thick skin, so you lay out all the problems in an honest way.
Yeah, I think you do have to. I mean, Jamie and I, we have for years exchanged most of the shorter things that we write, whether it's an essay or, story or whatever. We usually do send each other things, and yeah, we'll be pretty honest, because I think you need to know that when someone tells you something is good and working, that there's nothing that feels better than that, but you want to know that it's genuine, and we can take it. Yeah.
Right.
And you got to have it. It's true.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about also when you were coming down the home stretch, you're pregnant with your second child, I think, when you're finishing Friends and Strangers. And it's just very difficult to write when your other toddler is demanding you and everything. So you go to like a neighbor's house who are friendly, who gave you some serene writing space. Can you describe that too? How you actually got this book finished?
Yes. So actually, it was actually how I got the book really started, because my son, I really started kind of taking notes when I was pregnant with him. And then the first 6 months of his life, I didn't have any childcare or anything. It was just me and him all day. And all night. So I wasn't really writing. I was just note taking. As things would come up, I would email them to myself, and knew that eventually I'd be able to write again, hopefully. And so when he was 6 months old, we finally had childcare, and friends of mine who lived a couple blocks away were going to California for work for, I think it was a couple months. And so they very generously, they also had a baby of the same age. So they very generously said, you can work at our apartment, and just, if you'll water the plants, that would be great. And my friend she's wonderful with plants. She had so many beautiful plants, and I'm terrible with plants. She was like, you can even kill them all. I don't even care, which was so lovely. And it was funny because, so my son was 6 months old. I started going over there, and in a way that it had never happened for me before, the words were really just like flowing. I was so excited to be back to work, and knowing that I had less time, I think helped too. It made me more productive. But after doing that for like 3 weeks or so, I would go over every day. I'd write for a little bit, and then I would fall asleep on their couch every day. And I was so tired, and I was like, well, I guess this is normal because I have a 7-month-old and it's just all catching up with me. But it turned out I was actually pregnant again. That is why I was so tired. And so it was, I think when you have a newborn, you just go to another place. I actually loved it because it felt so different from real life. Like, I had a lot of friends who said, I just want to get back to real life when they had a new baby. But for me, I loved it. It was just so different. But I was sort of in that state of pregnancy and newbornhood for 2 years. And it was a lot. So yes, my daughter was born then in November. My editor also had 2 babies during this process. So as you saw in the acknowledgments, I kind of, referred to it as like a relay race. It always felt like one of us was handing the other a draft and then going and having a baby and disappearing for 3 months. And then,
Right.
it was very much in the spirit of what the book is about. So that was good.
I also want to talk a little bit about, this was a tremendous piece. I know you got a lot of reaction to it, a New York Times essay op-ed, an emergency meeting of the Babysitters Club. So your time that you talked about up here in Loudonville, there's this little girl named Neely right across the street. Tell us a little bit about her. She seemed like such a enterprising, wonderful young girl. And I think you probably saw a little of yourself and maybe a little of Sam in her too, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Tell me about this little girl.
So Neely was our neighbor across the street. We were in a neighborhood in Loudonville where the houses were pretty spread out. And so it was all cul-de-sacs. So it was really nice because you could kind of be like out in the street. And especially in the beginning of COVID, my kids were always like scooting around outside and stuff. But not many people were really talking to us because they didn't know who the heck we were, and people weren't really talking that much in general, I would say.
Right.
The one person who always talked to us was Neely, this little girl across the street. And she's like so vibrant and so full of life and so curious. And at one point, I remember when I finally met her mom, I was like, so my husband's name is Kevin, and he does this, and I do this. And she was like, oh, I know. Neely told me everything already. She already knows all of that. So she was just so sweet with my kids and would always bring them her old baby toys and things, and they loved her. And every time we would talk to her, she would kind of plant a seed. She was only 8 when we first moved in, and she turned 9 while we were there. But she said, things like, oh, I really wish I could put your kids to bed. And I would be like, I wish you could too. That would be great. I
will give you that opportunity.
I wish you could watch them for a weekend. And then, one day she came over, and this was also after, 3 months of like zero childcare, no babysitters ever, ever, ever. And, and I was going to the grocery store, and she came up to me in the driveway, and she basically said she had this proposition that she was planning to go to summer camp, but it had now been canceled. And so she wanted to be a mother's helper for us and come over while I was home. She was like, she said, I can babysit and I could babysit, but I'm not old enough really to babysit. So I will come over while you're home and I will watch your kids. And I had totally delivered this exact same pitch. I asked her immediately, are you a fan of the Babysitters Club? Because it seemed to be pulled right from the Babysitters Club. And I myself had been, so inspired by those books. I loved those books.
My daughter read all those books.
Yeah. I mean, they're like an addiction for girls of a certain age. Like you just go through, and there's just so many, I got to interview the author, Anna M. Martin, who wrote the Babysitters Club a few years ago. And she also went to Smith, and I didn't know that when I applied to Smith, but a lot of women who went to Smith, they went there because of Anna M. Martin. They went there because she went there.
Wow.
And I think, I'm 39, your daughter's in her mid-20s. So it's like, I would say for my age, for the next, 15, 20 years worth of girls were really invested. And now they have these graphic novel versions that young kids are reading. So,
and now, as you mentioned in this piece, I haven't watched it, but it's a Netflix series. Are you watching it now as a 39-year-old?
I watched a few episodes, and I don't know. I'm like, who is this show for? Is it for 12-year-old girls, or is it for 40-year-old women who are, and why do I like it so much? Like, I think it's, the nostalgia factor, but also just like, oh, babysitters. Remember when you could go out and have a babysitter come? That was good. But, I definitely, my husband said that being with Neely was like being with the 9-year-old version of me. She would come over and, never stop talking.
You were pretty precocious. Did you have your whole business plan at 11? I think you said you were 11 when you're babysitting, right? Or something.
I was absurd. So this is what I was going to say is that, Anna M. Martin, I mean, I had many businesses when I was a child. I actually had a fashion design business and a radio station. And my father once came into the room. I was actually on the phone. Like I had opened up the Yellow Pages and I was calling furniture. I think I didn't really have the line down between imaginary and real. So I was calling like office furniture supply companies trying to get quotes for desk furniture. So yes, I was very precocious. And but the thing with the Babysitters Club that was definitely what happened with me and what happened with Neely, Anna M. Martin said to me, when she wrote the book, I don't think she particularly loved babysitting, but when she wrote the books, she was thinking more about like when you're a kid, you want to make money, you want to have that independence.
Right.
So she was thinking more about being a little entrepreneur rather than particularly a babysitter. But what so many girls, including me, took away from that was that babysitting was the key to freedom and adulthood and sophistication. And so she kind of unknowingly or unintentionally launched this whole generation of little babysitters, now 3 generations of little babysitters, and girls who wanted to babysit before they were really old enough to babysit. Because when you're reading the books, you're really not old enough to babysit yet, right? So a lot of mothers, I mean, one of the reasons I was so happy to have Neely was because there were mothers who let me babysit their children when I was way too young to babysit them. And I'm sure the mothers were just being nice to me. So it felt like a nice sort of full circle moment.
So I mean, there's inflation for everything. So my daughter's 25, our son's 30. What is the going rate for babysitting now? I'm sure they can make some good money. What is there? Is there like an hourly rate? Give me an idea. Brooklyn prices. What is it? $50 an hour or something? Or
it's kind of crazy. I would say for young college age, whatever. I mean, anywhere from 20 to 28 an hour. I know people have paid. And
That
when I
was writing, I think. I don't know. I got to rethink this.
no kidding. When I was a babysitter, I remember so clearly we never like we never had a price. You know, we didn't say, oh, this is what I charge per hour. We should have. But instead we just took whatever the mothers would pay us. And I remember a mother just paying me like the change out of whatever was in the bottom of her purse. I mean, it was so good for these young women
Yes.
for, getting what they're worth.
I mean, you must have had stories too. My daughter, when she would come back, she would babysit around. It's also a reflection on the parents, because I could tell the way she's describing, some of the kids were very difficult, call them brats if you want. But anyway, they controlled the household. And I would hear these stories. I said, oh my God, these parents
Yeah.
need to re-exert some control or something. I don't know. You must have seen that too, even when you were babysitting. I don't know.
Probably what babysitters say when I hire them. Yeah,
But it's so
yeah,
intimate. You see everything, right? You see the reflection of the parenting in the kid. You see, is it a messy house? Is it like a clean freak house? I mean, you see their intimate.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because when, I think the first time or two that you have a babysitter over, you maybe try to present like, yes, we always make the beds, or whatever it is. And then you just kind of go back to real life. And it's like, and exactly like you said, that you get to know everything about how people actually live. And it's especially, I think you're always comparing it to like your own family or your own situation. So, I mean, I always babysat, and I think this comes out through Sam in the book. I babysat for everyone in my neighborhood and everyone in my extended family, but I also babysat for like extremely wealthy people. I remember a friend and we babysat through this agency. It was called Parents in a Pinch, and the Parents in a Pinch would pay the most insane amounts of money for babysitting. Like I could not believe it. I'd be thinking, meanwhile, like I'm getting this on Friday night and Saturday night, I'm going to get the lady next door with the change at the bottom of her purse, right?
Yeah.
But that was a different world than the one I grew up in, and certainly not to paint all wealthy people with the same brush, but I would go into people's homes who really didn't even care at all like who I was. They maybe didn't even know my name. It was like, she came from this agency, she's here to watch my kids, goodbye. And it's fascinating to see how
Right.
people treat babysitters too.
Right.
And I was also a nanny in London for a year. So
I read that somewhere. I mean, that must have been interesting too. I'm sure that worked into a previous novel or something somewhere. Yeah.
we worked into drafts of this novel that then got cut because it was too extraneous to the
So
story. But
what's the hierarchy, and how would you differentiate a babysitter, a nanny, and an au pair? I'm always kind of confused. Is one more responsible or something, or just different terms?
well, a nanny is, this is your job. This is your full-time job. You're with these people, whatever it is, 30 hours a week, 60 hours a week, whatever the terms are, but it's the same person is coming every day to care for your children.
Right.
And so that was what I did when I lived in London. Babysitting is sort of more casual. Maybe you come on Saturday nights or whenever they happen to call you. And I think generally speaking, less is probably expected of a babysitter than a nanny, because the nanny, since she is really there day in and day out, she's expected to really be like taking part in the raising of these children to some degree.
They also expect a little like vacuuming and cleaning dishes, folding laundry, all that stuff, kind of.
That too, yeah. And bathing the kids and dressing the kids and helping them get potty trained and making sure they have manners and making sure they eat vegetables, where babysitting might just be they can watch a movie and they can eat pizza and I don't really care when they go to bed or whatever, right?
Right.
A little more fun, but also much more casual and part-time.
Yeah.
And then the au pair is usually a student, I think,
Yeah.
and certainly somebody from another country, and they are living in your home. So
Right.
They get paid very little, as far as I know, to care for children, but the trade-off is that they get room and board living in your home. I would imagine, I've never been an au pair or had an au pair, but I would imagine that it very much varies based on the luck of the draw of the family you get, how much time you must spend actually taking care of their kids. And I'm sure the line is even weirder when you're
Right.
living in the home. I mean, that would be a great novel. I'd love to read that novel.
Could be your next one. So I'm amazed at how prolific you are. 5 novels, and they're substantial novels. I mean, they're full length and very intricate, complex psychologically and plotting, but you've got 5 in 11 years. And then in this New York Times piece, you talk about you're in your, I think it's a Honda SUV, the door open, your kid's playing in the dirt, you're trying to finish this essay. You know, can you write anywhere? Is that discipline of newspaper? I'm a newspaper person. I have 40 years as a reporter. I still do a weekly column, and you get that discipline to write anywhere. But can you focus and write anywhere, anytime, make your deadline, or are you a different kind of writer?
I find different kinds of writing require different amounts of my attention. So fiction writing, I really need to be alone. I really need to have like total silence, like white noise machine. I don't want to hear anyone else talking. And of course, like now in the last 3 years, I've had 2 kids, and now we're all home all the time, and it's like complete madness. So I would like for that to change, but it hasn't. I saw Jane Smiley talking once, and she was talking about how she could write a novel while she's like making dinner for her kids, and they're swarming around her and they're doing their homework. And I was so amazed and so envious, but that is not me yet, unfortunately. So when it comes to any amount of fiction writing that I've done in the last few months, it's only like in the middle of the night when everyone else is asleep, unfortunately. Um, but then an article or an essay, something like that, I think, like you said, it does, that's old sort of newspaper thing does kick in, where I can write that more in bits and pieces and kind of step away from it. The thing with the fiction writing is like actually having to get into this other world, get into the world of that story. And that's for me the hardest part. So like, I don't want to be pulled out of it because it will take so long to get back into it.
Right.
But if I'm writing an op-ed, say like the one you're talking about, we were in Saratoga in that little park right in the center of town that's so lovely.
Yep.
And my son,
Congress Park.
yes,
And the little carousel. I don't know. The kids love that. Was that going?
I don't think it wasn't open, I think, but it is so beautiful there. And
Great city.
I took my kids there. We had a picnic that day, and then because my husband and I have been trading off in COVID times, who's working and who has the kids.
That's what I was wondering, what I could see online, and I looked at both your social media. He's a photographer, but he's not a photographer?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, he works in like
someone else.
like digital media. I wonder
Oh,
what
he does. Okay, I'm sorry, I was mistaken then. But you talk a lot in this book about, and it's always an issue with parents, the balance of responsibility, childcare, and it comes up in this issue with her in-laws and Elizabeth's situation herself. How do you two balance, either household chores or childcare and all that?
It's hard, especially now. I mean, I think all of us are just trying to survive. I don't know if you feel this, but
yeah,
I think in the last few weeks, the last like 2 or 3 weeks, so many people in my life, and I would include myself in this, I think we were all feeling like, okay, we just need to get through this weird summer, and then things are going to go back to normal. I think I even wrote in that piece, like, in September, my children will be going to daycare. And that's been my mantra all summer, right? So while I'm writing an op-ed in the Honda CRV while they're digging in a dirt pile in Saratoga, in July, I'm thinking, well, this is okay because in September, this isn't going to be happening anymore. And I think in the last couple of weeks, a lot of us have started to realize, especially people with kids, that no, things are actually going to stay really weird for a while, I think. And every day is going to have to be taken like on its own. There's not going to be I think anyway,
Right.
I hope I'm wrong, but it's really going to have to be like what my husband and I have been doing for the last few months, which is like, what time do you need to be alone today? Like, when do you have to a call or a Zoom or whatever it is, right?
Yes.
And I will make sure, hopefully, that children don't run in screaming during that time.
Right.
But that is pretty much what I have been able to do, and not as much the actual creating, which is kind of a bummer. I did
Are
my
you
whole
working on a new novel already? Do you jump into a new one, or do you let some ideas percolate and take a little break? Or are you jumping right into a new manuscript?
I kind of, at the very beginning of COVID, I wrote a pretty detailed kind of synopsis of what a new book might look like. Not an outline, because I'm not really an outline type of a writer, but just ideas for what the new book will be. But mostly that was because I knew, or I thought perhaps I would not have the time yet to jump right back in. So I wanted to make sure I didn't forget.
Right.
And yeah, so right now I'm not getting much of that done. I've been doing my book tour over Zoom, which
I
has
saw you had conversations with some really cool people on your virtual book tour.
yeah, and that has been the silver lining, that I can do my launch event with Curtis Sittenfeld, and I'm in Loudonville, and she's in Minnesota, and the bookstore in Brooklyn, Books Are Magic, is hosting the event. So, that's something we couldn't have done otherwise, which is
Right.
great. But it has been funny. I did one event with Lily King, who I love her writing so much. And my kids busted in toward the end. My
Of course.
son,
How about the big dog? Did the big dog come in
I
and
don't think the dog was there, but it was so chaotic I wouldn't have even noticed. But my son was totally naked because he had just come out of the bath. And he was in my lap screaming, demanding, I want bubbles. I want bubbles.
that's
And
viral. That's gonna go viral. Come on.
and Lily King, who's like so brilliant, and so lovely, and also a mom, she kept asking me these really wonderful, profound questions. But meanwhile, I'm trying to like get these little barnacle children off me. And I kept wondering why my husband was not coming in and taking them away. And then I found out that they had actually figured out how to lock the door, and they had locked him out, which we had just moved into this house. So I didn't even know you could lock the door to that room. It was chaos. And it was so,
God.
a lot of people messaged me after and said, thank you so much. You just encapsulated with that event what my whole life is like now.
Yes, exactly. Let me ask you, in reading Friends of Strangers, I'm going to mention who I sort of felt, at least, as you can tell with this interview, we could keep going. I won't keep you here forever. Very conversational, very fluid, very warm. I felt a little bit of like Ann Tyler, maybe Anna Quindlen, but also Richard Russo, because their family, their natural, realistic fiction and things. But who were your heroes or influences?
I love all three of the writers that you just mentioned. And it's funny because the event I just told you about with the naked screaming baby and everything, it was with Print, a bookstore in Maine, which is owned by Emily Russo, who is Richard Russo's daughter.
I didn't know she owned a bookstore. We just had him at the Writers Institute last year. We've had him a few times because he grew up in Gloversville.
Oh yeah,
An area not far from Albany. He's a nice guy. Yeah.
he's one of the loveliest people in the whole world. And he actually sent me an email after that. He was watching the Zoom event when my children came in, and he said he just couldn't believe it. It was he said it was like so uncomfortable. He had to like walk out of the room, but he was amazed by the whole situation. But yeah, I mean, those are all, you just named three writers whose work I love so much. And I do think there are, of course, really different styles of fiction writing. And the most important thing, and actually Anna Quinlan said this, and it is really true, is like the only voice that you can write is your voice. It doesn't have to be you, the person coming through in a novel, but if you try to be the other thing that you think is cooler or smarter or more interesting, you are probably going to fail, because the only original thing that you have to bring to your work at this point in the game is that voice. And so I do think there is my first novel, I saw it very much as like a modern updating of the group.
Yeah.
And
Mary McCarthy, right?
Yes. And the group is one of my favorite novels, but I would not say that Mary McCarthy is warm.
No. Is she a Smith College connection too, or not? Or
Vassar, I think.
Or Vassar, that's right. Yeah.
And, as I was writing the book, I was like, well, I want to write something like the group, but I just, like, I love my characters. I care about them in a way that I don't want to make fun of them, sort of. So it just taught me, like, you can love something, but you don't need to write in the exact same way.
Right.
Weirdly, because I can see myself right now, I see these books over my shoulder. Here's the group. This is an author, Jennifer Haig, who wrote Heat and Light, and she wrote a few other novels too, Mrs. Kimball. Oh my God, I love her writing so much, so much. And
so were you a literature major at Smith, or because since you went, you were?
Yeah.
And any prominent or award-winning authors there that are on the faculty or that you studied with? Or
I studied with Sigrid Nunez.
Oh yeah, wow. We tried to get her. We want to get her. Yeah.
Oh, really? She her book, The Last of Her Kind, is that book just blew my mind. That is one of the best novels ever. And I read it after studying with her, and I just was so amazed. I had a teacher named Douglas Bauer who was fabulous.
He had been at Albany. I know Doug. Yeah.
He was probably the best writing teacher I have ever had. I loved him. And
that's a small world.
Yeah. I also studied there with Kurt Vonnegut.
Really?
Yes, he came to Smith. This was 2003, so he was pretty far along in his career.
He was the New York State author. We presented him with that way back in like the mid '80s or something. He was pretty old then,
Yeah, and when he came to Smith, it was really funny. He said, it was very Smith in the sense that they were so happy to have him there. Understandably, I think it was called like a master class where maybe there were like 6 sessions or something like that, and it was catered. I remember that the class was catered, which I had never seen before. And he just said in the very first session, well, I left a cigarette lit and I burned down a barn. So my wife said I can't be home all day. So that's why I'm here. So I wouldn't say the teaching was really like, super top shelf, but it was very exciting to be in his presence. I'll say that.
So he worked in PR at General Electric Company in Schenectady, and he lived in the Albany, Schenectady area for quite a few years.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
All roads run through Albany. We got to get you to come, when we're allowed, come in person, since you know the area now,
Yes, I would love to. I love it there.
I have one other question. I think I noticed your mom also uses an initial and then a name, and you're J. Courtney. Is that a family thing? And what does J stand for? That was a question I had to ask before we wrap up here,
It stands for Julie. And so my mom, all the women in my mom's family go by their middle names.
Okay.
And the reason is that they're all named Mary. So to tell them apart, they all went by their middle names. And so my mom, you'll notice her name is M. Joyce.
Right.
Mary Joyce. And so with me, they kept that first initial thing, but for reasons I cannot explain, they named me Julie instead of Mary. They named me after my mom's college roommate instead of the virgin mother.
I gotta say, it's perfect for an author, though. It's got that I also wanted to congratulate you. I saw you landed on the New York Times bestseller list, and I know that's really important for publishers, certainly, to sell copies and things. I know you've made it on many lists of best books of the year and different things. Is that important to you? I know it is as a publisher, or how do you measure your success? I know you've gotten some wonderful reviews and things, but how do you see if you're successful or not on each novel?
It's a really good question. It's a really good question, and I think you know, I got a review for my book Saints for All Occasions that was like probably the best review I've ever gotten or will ever get, and it was from Ron Charles in the Washington Post, and
Oh
I
yeah, yeah.
I respect him so much, and I value his opinions so much, and again he gave this book a really wonderful review, and I think it kind of has to be like a sort of piece by piece thing like that, because every book I realize now gets bad reviews, gets good reviews, and reviews are so subjective. I'm very wary myself of writing reviews because I've reviewed a lot for the New York Times book review, and no one's ever really going to remember who wrote the review. They're going to remember that it was in the New York Times. And so, sometimes you get the most amazing review from someone who you feel like really gets you, and it's on their blog and only 7 people are going to read it, and that's really a shame. You wish it was the cover of the New York Times book review. But I think like the further along I get in this, the more I do realize that it's great to have, accolades that other people can see and other people can appreciate. But a lot of it is just kind of luck of the draw. Who did they assign the book to, and did it speak to that person?
Right.
And that's what writing is, when you think about it, if you can kind of remove the like acclaim aspect of it and just think about, among your friends, say, if everyone's talking about a novel, 3 people thought it was amazing, 2 people couldn't finish it, and 1 person thought it was okay, and 1 person thought the movie was better. I mean, so it's like, it's just so personal a thing.
Right.
And I think I've tried over time to experience it in that way, as opposed to the, bigger, I don't know.
I mean, you can't do better than Knopf. You've been with Knopf from the beginning. I also was going to ask, the books seem very cinematic. Of any in production, or have you sold the movie rights to any of the previous novels? And
I'm glad you think so, and I wish Hollywood thought so. My book, The Engagements, was purchased by Reese Witherspoon, which was exciting, but not much has happened, so I don't know if that is going to happen or not. And none of my other books have been optioned.
okay. Who would you want to play Sam and Elizabeth?
Well, I initially my dream was to have Greta Gerwig and Saoirse Ronan play the
Ooh.
2 roles.
2 great actors.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
But then I was thinking, and now I can't remember her last name, which is terrible. Is it Binny Feldstein? Is that her name?
Yeah.
I thought she would be a really great Sam.
Yeah.
And then I know she has a whole relationship with the actress Elizabeth Banks, and I thought, the 2 of them could be great.
Yeah.
So any of them,
Great.
or anyone else, really, I'd be thrilled.
Or Reese, she could
Could
play.
totally do a great Elizabeth. Yes, yeah. That is true. That is true. But I do think there are these pairings. Like, I think about what's great about either of those 2 pairs that I mentioned is like they have these organic real life friendships, and one of the women is in her 30s and one of the women is in her 20s, I think. I don't even know how old actresses are, but that's what I think anyway. They certainly have a friendship that is probably, intergenerational, maybe if only barely. And
Right.
I think that is really an interesting thing when you have a friendship between 2 women of different ages. One of my closest friends through the past several years actually passed away a couple of years ago. She was 80 years old.
Wow.
I did not know she was 80 years old. I probably would have said she was 70. She taught at NYU. She was so brilliant. We would have dinner once a month, and I loved her so much. And it was when I went to her memorial that I learned that she was 80.
Yeah.
But she was someone who was like a dear, dear friend of mine. And you get so much out of friendships with people of different ages, I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry you lost your friend.
Thank you.
But this book has a beautiful ending. I'm not going to spoil it. But can you talk about the woman that you babysat for Smith College that didn't recognize you in the moment, and but through the magic of the internet and this New York Times article, there's a little follow up to it, right?
Yeah. How did you know that?
I saw it on something I read online, and I'm sorry, somehow I had your husband as a photographer, so that was a fail.
That's
Anyway,
okay. Um,
yeah, tell that story.
yeah. So I wrote in that article in the Times about Neely. I spoke about different women whose children I babysat for, and I mentioned the woman who I saw in the crosswalk and who I watched her baby my senior year. And when I posted that piece on Instagram, she actually commented and said, "Hi, it's me. I'm really sorry I didn't recognize you in traffic 10 years ago." And then we've since been emailing back and forth about our lives and everything that's happened since in this really intense, wonderful exchange. So, and then I did like an Instagram live conversation with Jenna Bush for the Today Show, and she was asking me about this. Does the woman know you wrote the book? And then she commented, Catherine, the woman I babysat for, I'm here. I'm watching. She was watching it with her daughter, who I used to
That's
babysit.
cool.
So it was really cool. And she herself is an artist. She's a painter, and so I think she has the right sensibility to understand like how a moment or a relationship can be a jumping off point for a piece of art, but not necessarily, it doesn't mean the book is about her, because it certainly isn't.
Right.
And I wouldn't want people to think Elizabeth is her, because Elizabeth is imperfect, let's say.
Yes. So the book is Friends and Strangers. If you were at the actual, in-person book festival, the line would be down the hall at the book table to get it signed. But I'm wondering, you think your publisher, you do book plates? Because we're gonna
Yeah.
put a link to our local indie bookseller for all the people on the virtual booksellers. But you've done this? Okay.
Yeah, let's
Great.
do that.
Excellent.
And I just want to say one more thing, since you are where you are. Do you ever go to Genoa Importing?
Yes, right on Route 9, right at the corner of Loudonville and that. Yeah, that's a cool place.
We were living right near there, and we miss it so much. We were eating there like, I don't even want to tell you how many meals a week we were eating from Genoa Importing.
Best sandwiches, yeah.
Best.
Yeah.
And they have the black and white cookies from the Cookie Factory, which are the best black and whites I've ever had.
And that's coming from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
We could go on and on, but I've got to let you go. I'm sure your kids are screaming, and your husband is like, "Come on, this is my quiet time." But anyway, J. Courtney Sullivan, Friends and Strangers, thanks for being on the virtual Albany Book Festival. And we hope after COVID has passed and it's safe that you'll come to Albany and see us in person.
I would love that. This has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
This book festival is made possible with the support of the McGuire Family Endowment at the Writers Institute, the University at Albany Foundation, the Office of the President of UAlbany, the Peacock Family Foundation, the Capital District Library Council, Stuyvesant Plaza, Chet and Karen Opalka, Charles Toohey and Alice Green, Pernilla Dake, Elizabeth Ruthman, and Betsy Lopez. If you appreciate our programming and would like to support the Writers Institute, you can find out how at nyswritersinstitute.org.